I missed Mass on Sunday twice. I lied about
liking Thor Dark World once.
I ate meat on Friday once.
Wait a minute, can you back up a little bit and say that again?
I ate meat on Friday once.
No, not that one. Back up a little more.
Liking Thor Dark World?
Yeah, that's the one. Do you realize what you said?
It was only once, Father.
Bye, Father.
It was great to be a Marvel fan and go to confession, just as long as I didn't say it on Twitter, or anywhere in public, for that matter. Thank goodness, we live in a world where we can coexist, despite our opinions on things, right? So here it goes. Thor 2 Dark World was not that bad.
Okay, I agree, it wasn't a perfect movie, but it's often considered to be the worst Marvel movie of all time, and I have never agreed with that. Captain Marvel is. If you scavenge around the internet, the most common criticism will say things like the plot is rushed and lazy, the cast seemed like they didn't want to be there, and the villain was forgettable. And well, yes, actually, to all of that. But we'll lick that wound later. There's plenty of room for critique, and I'm not here to tell you that Thor 2 is the greatest superhero ever made, but I liked it. And if you give me a few minutes of your time, I want to revisit the early years of the MCU, set the scene of where we were back then, and shine some positive light on the infamous sequel. Whether it's memorable characters, impactful moments, or the fact that Dark World secretly gave us, the fans, something so important that to this day we should be hiding bubblegum statues of Kevin Feige in our closets. And even if you hate Thor or just this sequel, I promise you're going to learn a lot of weird new facts through my rambling, or your money back guaranteed. In this video, I'm going to plead my case to finally give us all a chance to look back with acceptance rather than absolute abandonment. My name is Adam, and this is a defense for Thor 2 Dark World.
Oh man, I am so fired.
The first step of acceptance is understanding. Understanding that at the time of release, we were experiencing a global wave of superhero movie fatigue at an unprecedented magnitude. Starting on May 2nd, 2008, we were introduced to our playboy billionaire philanthropist, and in the next short 5 years, we were blessed with Tony again running the bases, Hulk and his change of faces, Steve Rogers returned from freaking hypostasis, and that's just the Marvel movies, not DC, not Kick-Ass, not the animated series, just canon MCU. It's easy to forget that we pumped out 7 movies, mostly origin stories, and an entire freaking Iron Man trilogy before we even got to this dilemma. And oh yeah, the movie that just so happened to be released the previous year.
Jackson with a repulsive blast, Captain America throws a shield fall fast. Thor's hammer makes thunder and lightning crash, and the whole kit's hard with a big Hulk splash.
Yup, the biggest fictional collaboration, and at the time of release, the third most successful movie ever. A cinematic payout after 4 long years of anticipation. The moment that we all waited for to see if they were actually going to pull off a live action Avengers. And spoiler alert, they did. It was a home run. Everything that Kevin Feige and friends touched to turn to gold. Even the most casual moviegoers made their way to the theater to step on board the hype train, and it appealed to the critics as well. The next massive phase of on-screen Marvel was greenlit, and we left the theaters feeling fulfilled. No crazy twist, no cliffhanger ending, and after holding back our bursting bladders for 2 hours, 23 minutes, plus previews, plus concession lines, plus the time we spent picking out a t-shirt with the best obscure yet thematic reference on it, we sat at the edge of our hopefully not sticky seats, curiously awaiting the credits end. The screen cuts to black. This is it. Marvel's infamous post-credit scene after its biggest release yet. The end of Phase 1. Are we about to be introduced to the next big bad? Or an X-Men reveal? Galactus? Wolverine? Nope. Just shawarma. Disney trolled us hard. At the time, I was stricken with a bittersweet feeling, but on the car ride home, I got to let it all sink in. They did it. They pulled it off. A proper live-action MCU that didn't suck existed in my lifetime. I didn't have to put it in the same grave as the first Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and As for X-Men, well, it's all downhill from First Class anyways. And while Marvel usually releases a movie every 6 months, this time they gave us an entire year off. To quote Jorge Masvidal, was it necessary?
They were super necessary.
Sony had the Amazing Spider-Man reboot coming up in 2 months with Andrew Garfield, and I hadn't even pooped out my popcorn from last night yet.
I'm in trouble.
I needed a break. It was like the opposite of post-concert depression. Instead of being sad that I looked forward to it for so long and it had come and gone, I was just happy that it happened. It proved to me that they had the right team, dare I say, assembled at Disney Marvel headquarters. The last thing we would need is for them to rush out something new and stomp the franchise into the ground again. And I certainly wasn't ready for another origin story. Thankfully, I think they felt the same way, because after that much needed 1 year layoff, we were instead given our first trilogy.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference.
May 3rd, 2013, Phase 2 began poetically, bringing closure in trilogy form to the character that kind of started it all, promising the end of the Iron Man solo films. This time he came with the essence of something new. We've already seen him fight terrorists, we've seen him fight his friends, and we've seen him Master Chief a weapon of mass destruction against an invading alien race. But this time, the damage he's taken both physically and mentally are on full display. As the threequel calls back to his roots as a mechanic, it doesn't miss an opportunity to remind us that Tony Stark isn't Iron Man is Tony Stark. Although it's cliche, it lands impactfully here. Throughout the entire movie, Tony clearly suffers through his own demons. The self-made, self-assured survivalist still stands before us, but his confidence flickers like a Charmander's tail in the rain. Just hearing the words New York triggers a crippling panic attack. Never take him to a Jay-Z concert. This trilogy lays the foundation for the Marvelverse to move forward emotionally. Actions have consequences now that will last longer than their limp off screen into the credits. Our favorite characters will evolve from setting to setting and carry their pride as well as showcase their trauma. We learn that Tony accepts who he is as a mortal man, and that hell, if powerful otherworldly beings exist, it probably isn't going to get any less complicated from here for him. And if anything like New York was to happen again, he would be willing to give up everything to save the ones he loves. Everything. By Endgame, this is a common reoccurrence. All of the characters from Hawkeye to Scarlet Witch have their own baggage to carry around, and the MCU practically turns into an airport terminal of grief and stoicism. It was a turning point in the on-screen universe where you could see it get darker. As if the writers had a meeting where someone said, "Okay, we've done Iron Man twice, what do we do next?" And the showrunners replied, "I don't know, Iron Man, but he's going through an emo phase?" And it totally worked, so they stuck with it for the next 8 years and counting. And then voila, 6 months later, we finally make it to our main event, allegedly the worst Marvel movie of all time, Thor, but he's going through an emo phase.
Guess it had a little more kick than he was looking for.
Wow.
Thor 2 picks up right where the Avengers left off. The Rainbow Bridge has been reconstructed, Loki's in space jail from everything that happened in New York,
I'm swearing you're gonna freak me out.
and Heimdall can still see everything. Well, almost everything. Back on Earth, Jane Foster is doing science things and inspecting some portals that randomly appeared in the middle of an abandoned warehouse, and they seem to have some mystical properties. One of the portals pulls her in and off she goes. The all-seeing Heimdall alerts Thor that his girlfriend is both missing him and, well, literally missing. While she's sucked away to Brazil or wherever, a magical force called the Aether infects her like something out of Stranger Things. Long story short, just like the Tesseract, the Aether is more than meets the eyes. It's actually one of the Infinity Stones, and in the wrong hands it can be super overpowered. Don't believe me? Here's a few examples of this particular artifact in the wrong hands being overpowered. So yeah, not exactly something you'd ever use as a paperweight. As this powerful presence ripples its energy across the universe, it acts as a smelling salt and awakens the former foe named Malekith, whose plan is to take the Aether and use its reality-shaping power to destroy the 9 realms and restore them back to a pre-Big Bang period. We can see that it's pretty typical Marvel formula, using a bad guy awakened cliche, but that's not enough to single-handedly rotten this tomato, so what was it then? What went so wrong?
That is hilarious.
Under the working title Thursday Morning, it was cursed from the start. Or also going through an emo phase. Dark World's pre-production was a mess. It had more team changes than an Antonio Brown jersey. There's a really messy timeline on Wikipedia, and it's easy to see how quickly things got out of hand. April 2011, over a year before The Avengers even released, Kevin Feige stated that following Avengers, reminder, 2 movies before Dark World, Thor is going to go off into a new adventure on his own. Kenneth, the original director of Thor 1, replied saying, "It's news to me, and I'm thrilled that they are that confident." That doesn't strike me as a man who is confident in his work, but they brought him back for the second one. June 2011, Disney announced a summer 2013 release date for Dark World, and shockingly, Kenneth was out. September 2011, Marvel began some new negotiations. Natalie Portman actually wanted to take a break from acting entirely, but only agreed to a contract for this movie if she could work with director Patty Jenkins. Marvel gave her a chance, and Patty hatched an entirely new idea for the 9 Realms. She wanted it to be Shakespearean, but, across space. Romeo and Juliet, but in Asgard. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. 3 months later, the release date was pushed from summer to fall because Patty 2, guess what, was out. And it was all chalked up to creative differences. Consequentially, she then went on to work for Marvel's direct competition and made one of the best freaking movies in the genre with Wonder Woman. Honestly, I can't even be mad about it. Wonder Woman was great. I don't know if you've heard this before, but Natalie Portman was pissed because now she was already stuck in the contract without her dream director. It really makes you see these characters differently, doesn't it? But to make up for it, Marvel then worked with Natalie again directly to pick out their next and final option straight from Game of Thrones docket, Alan Taylor. Alan was obsessed with the Nordic roots of Thor. He wanted this movie to be Viking-like, darker, more gritty, and intentionally really dirty, to quote him. The main difference I have from the original director's approach is really to do with the look and tone. Things look really dirty. The first Thor was quite shiny, and it was a very conscious, smart choice. When I came in, I wanted to get more of a sense of the Norse mythology. The Viking quality, the texture, and the weight of the history. He's a superhero, but he's been around for thousands of years. His dad is God, Alan Taylor. This is where I'm divided. On one hand, his intentions are clear and they have legitimate reason behind them. Vikings are cool. Some of the scenes are gorgeous and the desaturation makes what little vibrance he uses pop. Take, for example, the first scene where Thor finally returns to Earth after Jane disappears. Earth is gray and dreary. It looks like what I imagine London always looks like. Thor's cape, however, stands out remarkably, and the bold red hue provides some eye candy for the color palette. They use the same brilliance for the movie posters, making the red stand out. The color red has a range of symbolic meanings, including life, health, vigor, war, courage, anger, love, religious fervor. The common thread is that all of those require passion, or so color psychologists have documented. Clearly, when Thor shows up, it does have a sort of presence to it, like Daddy's home or something. On the other hand, some of the scenes, especially those shot on Earth and inside the Aether, look more similar to a live-action Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It was a desaturated experiment that, in my opinion, often fell short of encapsulating the bright Marvel Cinematic Universe that we've grown to adore. And I'm glad I looked up the Alan Taylor quote stating the artistic direction was intentional. Although it's not my preference, I guess I can respect him for making it his own. Now, if the directors were tourists at Venice Beach, the script would be the musky bong they passed around during a Sunday sunset drum circle. Yes, that actually happens in Venice. But once the script was finalized, they finally cast the following actors: Benedict Cumberbatch, Joshua Dallas, and Zachary Levi. Just kidding, all of them dropped out too. But we did get Christopher Eccleston to play Malekith. kings, queens, and everyone in betweens, we have reached the lowest common denominator. Malekith was chosen to be the primary antagonist of this movie, which at face value isn't all that bad, as he's a pretty fun character who has fought many of the various Avengers throughout his comic life. Now let's play some sad music you've probably never heard of before and talk about why Malekith would fit perfectly with the angsty emo narrative. Malekith was a dark elf born during a period of bloodshed where his people were at war with the trolls. After 12 of his older brothers were slain, his mom said, hey, maybe we're not cut out for this whole war thing, and she sold him into slavery for 2 sacks of snake livers and a barrel of pickled toads. And you thought Harry Potter had it bad in the broom closet. He continued not as a soldier, but as a body burner, until those darn trolls found out, and they threw him into prison where he met a wizard. Thankfully, the wizard was a righteous man who helped him escape and even took him in as an apprentice, where Malekith was showing great potential to be a wizard himself. So one day, over a nice dinner, the wizard was like, hey man, we make a pretty good team. We should probably work together and bring peace to our land. And you might be saying to yourself, that sounds like a good idea. We've reached this fork in the road, and yet it cuts like a knife. But how useful would this metaphor cutlery be if there wasn't any food on the table? Well, it wouldn't be. The forks would probably be useless. Their entire existence would be brought into question and inevitably succumb to a realization that they're existentially worthless, with no purpose aside from a joyous jingling sound when you open and shut a drawer. Why go on? So Malekith said, nah, that, and he actually stabbed his new wizard friend to death with the literal silverware, because in his crooked reality, he was the fork. He was born a tool forged by fires, made by conflict for conflict. Seeing a future where he would emerge purposeless infuriated him. So he promised that as long as he lives, there will be darkness. And that is where this untrustworthy trickster begins the journey of Malekith the Accursed. Instead, we got this. His rich backstory was completely ditched, his sick parents, his dead brothers, his betrayals, we got not. What we are presented with is some dude hooked up to a Mewtwo machine in space that wakes up like Finn after another Ray wet dream. They spent more time on his costume design and paying someone to write an original alien language than they did giving us a reason to empathize or care about this character in the first place. It shouldn't even be a debate. Malekith isn't a bad choice for a villain at all, and Eccleston probably could have crushed it if they gave him more material to work with. Don't take my word for it, just ask Christopher Eccleston himself. Working on something like G.I. Joe was horrendous. I just wanted to cut my throat every day, and Thor, just a gun in your mouth. That is an exact quote from the actor of Malekith. He said it was a miserable experience to work with Disney and have so little to do aside from sit in the makeup chair all day. If Malekith himself doesn't even like the role, how could we? Luckily, that's it. That's the dirty laundry. A plethora of mistakes in pre-production, misfit directors, script juggling, and entirely uninterested actors, and Marvel allegedly overstepping their boundaries in the writer's room one too many times. I feel bad that they had to operate under the pressures of such a tight deadline, but that's showbiz, baby. And considering I hold myself to the mantra that good enough is good enough, I won't expect perfection out of them. In fact, even after all of that, I still think the negative aspects are outweighed by...
It reminds me of an issue of Spider-Man I did when Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy went lingerie shopping.
The film surprisingly has a jovial essence of not giving a frick. It's like the actors that actually wanted to show up were having fun with it. Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston, Anthony Hopkins, those whose last names I just realized were all H's. Even Kat Dennings. Nobody ever gives Darcy enough credit.
You haven't showered, didn't you? You smell good.
They're consistently hilarious. Thor 2 has some of my favorite gags in the MCU. Some are tongue-in-cheek, some are downright ridiculous, whether it's subtlety like Thor hanging his hammer on a coat rack or Dr. Eric hanging his hammer around Stonehenge. Arguably the best joke from the movie comes about exactly when the movie finds its narrative footing. The first 52 minutes are a bit grindy, but once Frigga is killed, the movie really starts following a much better subplot. Thor and Loki on a buddy cop adventure. To me, that sounds a heck of a lot better than Romeo and Juliet in space or whatever. The S-tier gag in question actually has some more fun backstory. The scene where Loki transformed into Captain America for the cameo appearance was completely off script. Tom Hiddleston was basically sitting backstage, saw Chris Evans' Captain America suit, and said, "This is it, baby. This is the day I get to squeeze into the stars and stripes." Against the director's direction, he puts on the suit, they film it just for the funsies, and Tom Hiddleston does his best impression of Captain America he could. But we never got to see Tom Hiddleston's performance. Instead, Chris Evans came in later to film his part, and they showed Chris Tom Hiddleston's impression of him. Then, being the national treasure that he is, Chris Evans did an impression of Loki's impression of him, and that is what we see in the finals cut. It's brilliant. However, they did release Loki's performance directly to the DVD box set. And if you haven't seen it yet, here's a special treat for making it 20 minutes into this video. Thank you very much. Enjoy a rare little bonus scene.
Oh, this is better. Ooh. The costume's a bit much. So tight. But the confidence. I can feel the righteousness surging. Hey, you want to have a rousing discussion about truth, honor, patriotism? God bless America! What?
And that's why I think this scene is magical. It showed their constant openness to adjust and willingness to not take themselves so seriously, and it happens time and time again. I'll keep making references to it, but to go back to the Pokemon analogies, if Thor 1 was the Charmander, then Thor 2 is the Charmeleon. It's definitely an awkward in-between stage. It's kind of cool at times, but above all, it provided everybody involved with enough experience to fulfill their own potential afterwards. If you don't believe me, rewatch the first movie. Something was missing. His comedic timing wasn't there yet. He still plays the part, though there's seemingly a lack of closeness to the character. He's performed the lines as they're written, but lacking a sort of X factor that pulls it all together. Take, for example, his delivery here.
At least make it a challenge for me.
Now compare that with his opening joke in Dark World.
Hello? I accept your surrender.
There's a stark difference between the two. With the cheeky smile off screen, that point break smirk that we grew to love over the years. Maybe they were following some comic source material strictly, I don't know for sure, but my theory is that what he was missing in Thor 1 was found through Iron Man. Hear me out. We already know that Thor's confident, he's the god of hammers for crying out loud, but once he started bringing that
He's a friend from work.
attitude, he became even more charming. And it works in more ways than one because that smile gives him something else to lose. When we see that adorable light go out, we know it's time to get serious, and that helps us empathize with what he's going through. Maybe getting picked on by the other Avengers helped him find the missing piece of the portrayal puzzle. And I'm talking about Chris Hemsworth as an actor. I'm sure being surrounded by those A-list studs was full of surprises and helped him sharpen his tools, but Dark World was his chance to show them off. Working in this sandbox session loosened them up to being pushed to their creative limits. All of this together is what launched Ragnarok into my top 3. Oh yeah, and about the way it was filmed, the whole movie wasn't drab. The Game of Thrones director went huge with the battle sets as expected. Asgard looks gorgeous, and hey look, we get a little pod racer sneak peek. Don't forget, Disney didn't even butcher Star Wars yet. A lot of the film was shot on anamorphic lenses, which I'll make this one quick. They're rectangular lenses rather than spherical lenses, and they're stretched out the full screen, which brings these beautiful ultra-wide shots that can show us the entire film location before they paint the CGI in. And that's what brings this awesome scale to the ships to look lifelike and massive and just really gorgeous in IMAX theaters. But nothing looked more beautiful than my final bullet point of this video. If carrying the weight of this movie was illegal, then this man would get the death penalty. And without a doubt, the greatest thing to come out of the first 2 movies was...
Wow, nice suit. Zip it, Stanley.
God, Loki steals this movie. Every scene he's in is magnetic. Just as his brother did, he changed significantly from one film to the next, and if you listen closely, you can hear the exact moment the world fell in love with Tom Hiddleston.
Here?
I'm Loki. You may have heard of me.
That was for New York.
I like her.
reinforce my statement that the team was open to working on the fly, Loki was barely in this movie at first either. They knew he was going to play a huge role in his mother's death because they needed a way to break him and humanize him a little bit, but they didn't know the goldmine they struck casting him until post-production at Comic-Con 2013. After they had already shot the movie and begun wrapping everything up, Hiddleston made one of the most epic guest appearances ever.
We're in post-production of a movie called Thor: The Dark World right now, which is...
Humanity. Look how far you've fallen. Lining up in the sweltering heat for hours. Huddling together in the dark. Like beasts.
This is the moment Kevin Feige shit actual bricks and said, throw out everything, we need more of that guy. And he stated this himself. They immediately paused post-production and started lining up alternative scenes for Loki to bathe in his own glory. Look at how much fun he was having up there, just playing himself to the crowd. He had total control over them, and for 2 minutes they lost their minds, hearts, probably wallets. Afterwards, Loki continued to be extremely important in the following Thor trilogy, the Avengers movie, and even got chosen first over Doctor Strange to set up the multiverse and get his own freaking Disney Plus series, which, by the way, takes its time to improve some of the flaws the Dark World had. Even in the first episode of Loki, we get a heart-wrenching montage of moments in the MCU that broke through his mischievous exterior. They even explored his role in his adopted mother's death in a meaningful and emotional way. It erased the illusions and showed us the real Loki. If you haven't watched the Disney Plus series, I highly recommend taking some time to binge Loki because his importance in this universe is only going to grow parallel to the love his fandom has for him. Without the sequels team, who was seemingly doomed from the start, constantly adjusting and adapting and working off the back foot, I don't think we would have had such flexibility and frivolousness with the final execution. But it's because they had a short window to weed out the dead and make room for something marvelous that would outgrow the movie entirely. Thor: Dark World was not a perfect movie. I wouldn't even place it in my top 5, but given the time of its release, understanding how miserable pre-production must have been, and yet still providing us with the evident growth of our favorite characters who truly found themselves on screen in the most enjoyable way, where they themselves are loving what they do, that's good enough for me.
Hey, wait, where are you going? Hey, you were supposed to be my lift home. How will I get out of here? Hey, gee, I've got so many more stories to tell. Guys, oh, gee.